Good afternoon. I am Councilor Knudsen, and I would like to call our weekly informational together here on January 7th, 2008, and Happy New Year to all of you. Our first order of business, as usual, is our City Council staff report, and Deborah Owen, would you please provide that to us, for us?
Thank you, and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. There's just a few things to go through today, and I put some of those on your desk for discussion. To begin, just to let you know that the Planning Department has had a small reorganization, if you will. Shauna Goldhammer, who many of you know, has been promoted to the Zoning and Enforcement Manager, and then also Erica Beck is now the Senior Planner. Both are effective on December 31, and so there's been some restructuring in that department. So if you need to contact some of those people, then you'll know. They've changed some of their duties somewhat, in particular Shauna the most. And congratulations to those ladies. And then on to the elections. There are two election maps in front of you. One was from the 2006 election. That was the mayoral council election. And one is from the previous, the Drake Springs pool, both of which when we joined with the school district. I think in an unofficial capacity, the school district has made a decision to joint with us, and we really appreciate that. Bev Chase and I and Tamara had met with them this morning to discuss the number of polling places, and the school district very much would like to continue to consolidate the polling places, and we worked through the list. There were 19 in the Drake Springs pool election, and we had discussed somewhere around 22 possibly for the 2008, for the April 8th city school district election. We looked at voter turnout, and let me just give you those numbers. Voter turnout in year 2000, which would have been a council election with, I believe, charter revision amendments added to it, and no mayoral election. That was a joint election. There was 17% turnout for that. And then the voter turnout in the 2004 election, where there was city council and school district, it was 19.18. So in both situations, we're well below 20, and we don't anticipate, we're ever hopeful, but we really don't anticipate probably much of a difference in turnout unless something happens. The Drake Springs pool, to put that in perspective, was a turnout of 14%. And so just looking at try to balance a number of issues, one of which is, ADA accessible polling places, and want to make sure that we have places where people aren't walking downstairs or they can get into doors. There's plenty of parking also available is another issue. Cost, certainly for both entities, our costs are less the less polling places we have. But there also is the balance of, are we confusing voters? Can voters find the polling places? And so those are some of the factors. I really would like feedback from you on how you feel about that and concerns you may have, because we need to begin planning for those polling places. We need to reserve those polling places ASAP. So, and then before I finish up, there was another item that Councilor Kavanaugh and I think a number of the council in the last December 17th meeting had talked about, had in part stemmed from the Board of Ethics advisory opinion. But council for 2 years now has appropriated funds for outside legal advice in your budget. Kavanaugh and I think a majority of the consensus of the council on December 17th wanted to have a brief discussion about money that you had available in your account and how you would go about using that. I prepared a memo for you. You have approximately $12,000 under your 22.01 account for outside legal advice for 2008. There are a number of factors in hiring an attorney. I have done some legwork for you in looking at attorneys that are hired by other cities, and those who are hired by like Brookings and Aberdeen and Mitchell, and I've done some legwork for you on that. But probably more importantly, at this state, usually a contract will need to be executed between the parties, and generally the city attorney's office drafts all contracts, and that it needs to be routed through finance. There is no procedures for councils in enacting your own or executing contracts at this point, so that's usually how it's done. That's generally the rule. Then bills would come to the clerk's office for payment once you had used or hired an attorney for a project, and we would pay them out of your budget. So pretty simple there. I'm trying to think. There was a number of firms that I think maybe conflicted out because they already do serve other departments and members with the administration, and so I gave you a list of those on the memo. And I spent some time with Yvonne Taylor, too. So if any questions you have regarding possible names to put forth before you, I can help you out with that as well. And then finally, there's also a sample of the survey. We've kind of gone through a number of emails. The members on the committee who are council members are aware, but through a numbers of kind of stops and starts, we've finalized the survey, and you have a copy of that. That will go out, I believe, the cards will go out mid-January. The actual survey will go out at the end of the month, and then we'll get responses back in time. They'll actually mail out two different surveys, or two of the same surveys, to make sure we get enough responses back. And then I think once that is done, we're going to try to put that online to give to people as an alternative survey. It won't be a part of the results that are being generated through the polling organization, but just to give additional opportunity for citizens to weigh in and to give us feedback on what they would like to see us proceed with for the city. Any questions?
Would you have any feedback, first of all, on the precinct question, the consolidating of precincts and so forth, for Deborah? Okay, how about would you like to discuss at this time, I didn't mean to rush you if I did, is that would you like to discuss at this time the topic of using some legal funds to hire a lawyer? Councilor Kavanaugh?
Well, I'll start. So where do we go from here? If the council is still determined, a majority of this council is determined that we need to resolve this issue, you're suggesting that we authorize you to look at other firms other than the ones listed here?
Yeah, and I actually have. I've spoken with Yvonne Taylor, which many of you know is the executive director of the Municipal League. And there's a couple of names that have come up in attorneys who are outside of Sioux Falls, or in particular, if attorneys inside Sioux Falls. Are they familiar with other municipalities? Do they work in some capacity for other cities? Are they familiar with the home rule form of government? And those kinds of factors. And I think I've come up, and also because there are other issues that may be of interest to council, I think with developing a policy for TIFs, for instance, and there are some who are out there who actually are very experienced in that, have drafted TIF policies for Aberdeen, Mitchell, and Brookings, ethanol TIFs. So I think we have some good names out there.
Councilor, I'm sorry.
Does anyone have any objection to going outside of the city? I'm not suggesting that we would, but if the Municipal League has a group of recommended attorneys outside of Sioux Falls, does anyone have any particular objection to that?
The one that is the most qualified at this point actually is in the city of Sioux Falls, but doesn't work for a lot of the city of Sioux Falls work, but does a number of the TIFs for around the state. I think some of you would find that would be a great resource, even if it's just a resource to discuss a future policy. And I think Public Works also has used their expertise, so, and advice.
But are we talking about, with regard to this specific issue, not TIFs, but this particular issue about the Ethics Board, are there attorneys that we know of that could assist us?
I think there are, yes.
Councilor Jameson?
Well, back to the thing that brought this to a head, I guess the question for Gary. If the intent of the council is to have advisory opinions only offered to the employee or the elected officials of the city, what do we need to do to correct that, to make sure that that's our intent?
I think a very simple ordinance amendment would clarify that, and I think that would be, if that was what the council wished, perhaps one way to do it very quickly going forward.
I guess a question of the council, I believe that was the intent that the council would like to relay, is that it is an advisory opinion about any advice I wish to seek about myself only, or an employee would wish to seek for their personal advice. And I think that's the intent of the advisory opinions. I think once the opinion has been requested from the ethics board, you have the option of making that confidential and or making it public. Is that not correct? And that, to me, solves the problem, but I don't know whether we need to go any further than that.
I do have the ordinance, Chapter 12 and a half, ready to go, because I thought maybe you would want to assign it to a committee to work on. And I know that there's other issues, too. There's the fraud hotline, and the audit committee has talked about perhaps a whistleblowers ordinance to put in place. But I think under Article 1, which was a discussion amongst council, is to pull out that powers and duties and put that in a separate article, which would be, it's not really an overhaul, but it's just a semantic of, so that the powers and duties aren't in Article 1, since Article 1 expressly states that it doesn't apply to the mayor and the council. So that should probably be fixed, too.
Would there be any other thoughts on this topic at this time? Councilor Costello?
Deborah, maybe you could just send us an email, maybe a top 5 or 6 or whatever recommendations from Yvonne Taylor and
Okay.
yourself or whatever, and we can talk about it. Bob, we were only really concerned about advisory opinions or complaints against counselors or the mayor. There was really the separation for employees. I mean, wasn't it our intent to leave whatever exists for the employees, leave that alone?
Well, if I could.
Yes, sure.
I think the way it is written, I think the employee has the option of requesting an advisory opinion. My concern is that an advisory opinion should only be requested for the individual who's seeking advice. I can't seek an advisory opinion about Pat Costello or Vernon Brown or Bob Litz. If I'm looking for a complaint, if I want to file a complaint against that individual, then if I file the complaint, I can request that be kept private or confidential and or public. And I think that solves the problem. If our interpretation is that the advisory opinion is looking for my personal advice, I think that solves the problem.
I just go back to, I thought we were concerned about these advisory opinions being politically motivated, and that we were more concerned about that. I didn't necessarily get the feel that we were had a broader definition than that.
Well,
But I'm not saying you don't have a valid point. I was thinking, to me, it was more of a concern out of political malfeasance.
But that's exactly what it would do. You'd have to file a complaint, and then the complaint would have to be aired by the ethics board, and until it comes out of the ethics board, it's still confidential. In other words, it's not it can be a public one, I suppose, if you want. Is that not true, Gary? But that would be they'd have to put their name on the line that they are filing a complaint about that individual. They couldn't be done in the background without being upfront about it.
Deborah?
I was just going to comment. I know Councilor Jameson and I had visited. There are, I think, between Article 1 and Article 2, we could probably just tighten up the intent, if you will, to make sure that advisory opinions are about future behavior, or inquiring about issues that may be on the horizon. We're seeking advice about how we might respond or act, and that probably should be in both articles. In addition, I'm not sure that employees are given copies of complaints. It just says sometime early on in the process, and I think actually, in all fairness, whomever has a complaint filed against them should probably have a copy of it before they attend the Board of Ethics meeting, and employees included. And so we probably should tighten that up a bit, just in the ordinance. I'm not saying that it might not be the custom, but it probably should be defined better in ordinance.
Yes, Councilor Litz.
You know, there's some talk here today about confidentiality, and, you know, I wonder, with our good intent, if that's actually going to happen here, because, you know, according to the thing that happened to me, the confidentiality of the decision was breached, and unless we figure out some sort of a chain of custody with a timeline attached to it, some security measures for protecting these, you know, supposedly confidential items, I'm not sure if what we're talking about here is going to be effective or not. I do understand Bob's point and Pat's point, but along with this, we're talking about confidentiality here. And if there's a leak somewhere or somebody decides to let it out, how are we going to find out? How are we going to hold somebody with that information from the origination point responsible for what's going on?
Councilor Costello?
Bob, I think what, in your situation, if anything, I think it was probably a disagreement in opinion on what the procedures were, and at the very, if nothing else, lack of knowledge of the way it was handled. And, you know, that's why I guess we're having this discussion, because we think it either was handled improperly or we should do it a different way. And so I really have a hard time believing there was any malicious intent in your particular situation. Not to say that the way it was, I don't agree with the way it was handled, but I don't think there was any, you know, malicious intent as far as leaking something out.
And Councilor Costello, I agree. I mean, I'm not certain about that, and I just, you know, considering the content of what went on, I'm not, you know, I have trouble seeing how somebody would get some political mileage out of it, really. But, you know, the fact is that something that was supposed to be confidential and handed out to this council to decide what to do with it was breached before most of us had that opportunity. And while you still got a valid point, you know, it may not matter, you know, as far as the confidentiality goes, Pat.
Councilor Staggers?
Yeah, I was just wondering if we could come up with maybe a rough draft to make some of these corrections that Bob has mentioned for us to take a look at next week.
I was going to ask, I don't know, I can certainly work on that with the attorney's office. Did you want to assign this to a committee to work on and then come back to the council, or did you want just to have staff work on it for you?
Well, myself, I don't know about Bob Jameson or the other members of the council think, but I think that it's just really kind of a minor correction. First of all, just defining, you know, what an advisory opinion is, dealing with, you know, like you mentioned earlier, about what might happen in the future if this is done or whatever. I don't think it's too difficult, really.
No, not at all.
Is that the consensus of the group?
Madam Chair?
Okay,
If-
yes.
if I
Councilor
could.
Jameson?
Kermit, do you want to co-sponsor?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Gary, would you draft some things to correct what we're talking about? And then
Yes.
Kermit and I'll co-sponsor that.
Yes, and I'll work with Deborah, consider her thoughts, but I think we can have a draft by Wednesday at the latest in your hands.
Okay, thank you for everyone's input on this topic. Okay, moving forward, we will, the mayor is not here today, as you can tell, and but he will be with us this evening at 7, and so we will go ahead and run through our regular committee reports. Audit Committee, Councilor Kavanaugh? No report. Okay, Fiscal Committee, Councilor Costello?
We have no report, but we will be meeting immediately following the informational meeting.
Okay, thank you. The Land Use Committee?
No report?
Okay, no report. Public Services Committee, Councilor Brown?
We will meet next week, 5 p.m. in the overflow room, where we'll dive into the daycare registration issue that the council asked us to look at. Carol Muller will be here from the Helpline Center to brief us on what we're doing today and her thoughts on what might work or might not work.
Okay.
I missed that. When was that?
Next week, Monday, 5 o'clock.
Councilor Brown just wanted to suggest you might want to also see if Director Boozman would want to be involved in that, just because, you know, earlier this winter, Councilor Litz and I visited with her and a couple of her staff people at length when this topic first kind of became a,
Sure,
you
I'll
know,
invite her as well.
So I'll leave that up to you. It's just a thought. Okay, City Council open discussion. Any open discussion? Anyone? Councilor Litz.
I'd like to approach a subject here. I live over by the Spellerberg Park, the retention pond there, and I know last spring and last winter when that construction phase was going on, there was a lot of talk about it, and some unpleasant things were said about it. But I drive by there twice a day, and that has become quite the recreation area for that neighborhood. And it is an improved sledding hill that slopes down, goes out flat on the bottom instead of hurling you into the parking lot or out into the street. The other day, there was probably 250 kids and adults over there. And I just think that, Public Works and the Parks Department, there's a lot of opportunities for creating these type of recreational areas using retention ponds, detention ponds, BMP ponds, this type of thing. And I would look forward to, expanded usage with the parks and having those type of pond situations, turned into a recreational thing. So I wanted to mention that because I thought it was really a wonderful thing that it's turned into, and to Public Works, they took a lot of shots there last spring, and I knew, construction is construction, and sometimes it gets a little bit messy, especially when the spring rains come, but I'm just glad this thing has turned out. So that's it.
Would there be any other open discussion items? Councilor Brown?
I'd like to raise an issue for discussion for the council. It seems like eons ago, but we had some discussion about background checks on liquor licenses. And I think that the police chief answered to all of us when I had put out the question. Essentially, we're only doing a cursory check of whether applicants have a felony or not. The application process does ask if they are felons, but I don't know that we can always get a truthful answer by just asking. I did some checking with other cities, Watertown, Rapid City, Aberdeen. All of them do probably more extensive background checks than we do. Watertown probably being the most aggressive, looking at, they have a checkoff process. It goes to their police department like ours, but then they also do a check at the county courthouse, which, when I was a reporter, is very easy to do. It's a $15 fee to check to see if someone has a statewide or countywide or statewide record. But then also what Watertown does is they require a fingerprint from any of the applicants, and that is forwarded to the DCI for a statewide check. And they go so far as if someone has lived in other states, if the applicant has, they check with, it's maybe not called DCI in other states, but they do go to the fingerprint depository in other states to check for felony records there too. I'm not looking to create more work for staff. I think it would be inherent upon the applicant to make sure that they get the fingerprint check and the background check done. But I think, personally for me, I think it's something that we need to look at, and I'd like to hear what others' thoughts are in regard to doing those background checks on liquor applications.
Councilor Jameson?
Was there any estimate what that cost Watertown to run that comprehensive check?
They put it on, the burden is on the applicant to pay for it. The DCI check, I believe, is $20.
So it's added to the application?
Right.
Okay.
And I failed to mention, too, there's also an FBI background check that is $20, too, that checks nationwide, which might be a more simple process than what Watertown uses in trying to locate the fingerprint repository in each state. The FBI check is, you can do it online. It takes a little bit longer to get, but it's a simple process, very affordable, and I think it would give us some assurances that we know that the applicants are being truthful in their applications.
Councilor Costello?
Vernon, for discussion purposes, I think Chief Barthel sent out an email to us that brought up a number of different scenarios. What do you propose for these special one-day licenses or things of that nature?
And I don't have the silver bullet answer for that today, so if you have any thoughts, I'd appreciate hearing them.
I will tell you that I'm certain that the FBI has my fingerprints from my liquor licenses in Nebraska, so I know that was a process that we went through.
So you did?
Yeah.
And was that added on to the cost of your application?
Yeah, and it wasn't substantial. It wasn't... I think I've said before, my liquor license in Nebraska has cost me $795 a year, so Relative to what we have here, I think our annual licensing for licenses is substantially more than that, plus you don't have to pay $185,000 or whatever it is.
And given the value, what licenses cost in this community, I think that we need to make sure that they're in the right hands, and that's one of my concerns. I visited with Lori a little bit about it this morning. One of her concerns, of course, is staff time, and frankly, I'm a little concerned that we're babysitting applicants too much, because she said she's often having to call to remind businesses that they need to renew. That's not the city's job. I mean, if they're in the business, they need to be coming and renewing their applications. We shouldn't be spending staff time encouraging them to follow the rules.
Councilor Benega?
I agree with what's been said so far. I guess one of my concerns or questions would be is the corporate umbrella that most people use for licenses. Do we ask then that for every officer or director who is part of that organization, we also submitting themselves to a background check?
I can address that. Watertown does. They do that. And I think that we'd have to explore that to see. Another point I forgot to mention about Watertown's, they've been doing these kind of checks for about 7 years now, and there have been 3 times where they have denied a license for something less than a felony. Now, it's never gotten to before the council. They have a committee that gets assigned these. It'd be similar to our fiscal committee. So if there are problems with the applicant, the committee can address the applicant and I don't know if this is going to work. But there have been times where less than a felony, they have denied it. And then also you raise another point, because on our agendas, I personally would like to see the officers listed. Let's use the most recent ones, for example, Waterfall Plaza or 50/50 Holdings. Nowhere on our agenda does it say who the officers are. I don't think we're being completely fair to the public by not showing, or ourselves, by not showing who those officers are. I've been going online to the Secretary of State for South Dakota to find out who the officers are, but I think that we owe it to the public to be completely transparent on who's getting the liquor licenses, who's involved, who stands to profit off of these.
How would you like to proceed on this, Councilor Brown?
Well, most of it's really administrative issues, but I'm happy if public services, if we want to look at it, I'm happy to help try to lead us down that path, or if others have other ideas on how we should proceed, if there's an interest in doing this, I'd be interested in hearing it.
Councilor Jameson?
Just to follow up, Vernon, do they add it as a application fee, or is it just part of the license fee? Do they break it out?
They do break it out. I received, Watertown sent me all their applications and everything, and I'll forward that to the full council and the clerk so we can see how they do it. But it does break it out that it's on top of the license fee.
Councilor Costello?
I will tell you that my experience has been that all corporate officers and the general manager have to go through that fingerprinting process. Now, what I don't think they address in Nebraska is, anytime there's a change. Just because if that's what exists when the company was formed or when a place opens up, that, the changes I don't think are ever followed up on. So that would be a concern. And also, if we have to do anything more than send out an invoice for a liquor license, I don't think we should have to do anything more. And Lori does a very nice job, sends us a packet for our licenses and, with the specific information that is needed in the fee, and why we would ever do any more than that is, I don't know why. I mean, if somebody can't return their application or fee back invoice on time with a check, then, that's their problem.
Excuse me. Councilor Kavanaugh?
I would agree with Councilor Costello. I think it would only happen once, and you'd forget your license. And you'd remember next year. With regard to the criteria, since we've had this debate over what we can and can't do, we seem to be. Some have contended that the only thing we can do is judge appropriate person. State law 35-2-6 says, and I'm quoting Gary's email, must be of good moral character, never convicted of a felony. Is that Can you deconstruct that sentence for me, Gary? Does that mean both things, or one thing, or just exactly what does it? What disqualifies someone from being appropriate person? Is it just a conviction of a felony?
City Attorney?
A felony conviction will automatically disqualify you. You cannot hold a liquor license in South Dakota if you have a felony conviction. Good moral character is a judgment call for the council. For example, I'm aware of an applicant for a liquor license with Minnehaha County. This goes back 6 or 7 years, who had two DUI convictions, and that was denied because of the DUI convictions. So I think certainly the council can take a look at the totality of the criminal history in making a decision whether the person is of good moral character.
Councilor Brown?
Gary, can we with assurance today say that everyone out there with a liquor, beer, or wine license in the city of Sioux Falls, do we have assurance that there aren't felons holding those? Or are we just trusting that they check the box saying that, nope, I'm not a felon?
I'm sorry, that's a question that's better asked of the chief. I know that there was a license holder who was convicted of a felony, and I was contacted by his attorney, and I indicated that that person would have to resign would have to surrender his shares of stock in the corporation and no longer be involved in the corporation for the license to continue.
One other point, if I may, Dee, with the corporations too, maybe to address Gerald's question better, maybe we look at the on-site manager being the one to be fingerprinted, because they're really the ones responsible for the most part for what's going on. But we can go down that path and explore what would be the most or the best way to handle it.
Councilor Jameson?
Question for Gary. If we're going to charge for background checks and so forth, I believe we have to make that as an ordinance because the council sets the fees and things that can be charged to a citizen.
Yes, that would be correct. And if you wish to specify the procedure for which the fee is being charged, I believe you could do that by ordinance also.
I am really ready to assign this topic to the Public Services Committee unless any of you object to my doing so.
And I would just add that, Pat, I'd appreciate your input at Public Service, even though you're not on that committee, because of your experience in other states. That would be helpful.
Okay, and Councilor Brown, thank you for your research work and so forth on this topic, and so we'll just consider that assigned, okay, to Public Services Committee. And then just a couple other just little housekeeping things. Later this week, the mayor and I are going to do a Channel 16 show on the performance measurement, survey going out and so forth. And if you have any extra thoughts for me, any of you on anything you want me to work into that program, which is not very long, I welcome your suggestions. Also would like to tell you that tomorrow early afternoon I'm going to visit with a Kelloland reporter about recycling and the council's views on recycling. And of course I am smart enough to never speak for all of you on anything. I mean, I know I just speak for myself. But anyway, I'd just like you to know that, trying to communicate a little bit better here with you. And then there was just a little bit of confusion. I apologize that I was gone on December 17th, and actually also for the special meeting, because I have been traveling a little bit more than usual this month, or December. But anyway, there was just a little bit of confusion on the staffing task force, and I'm kind of responsible for that confusion, I think. And I'd just like to say I'm very fine with what you guys worked out on December 17th, that Councilor Jameson and Councilor Kavanaugh and Councilor Brown, I believe, have volunteered to work with Jennifer Holson on the staffing question. I had, before that, assigned that to Public Services Committee, but it was just through email, right there around the holidays. And I am fine with what you guys worked out with me being gone. And so we'll just consider that done and not make a bigger deal out of that. And would you have anything else? Would you have Councilor Kavanaugh?
red notes here talking about, under open discussion, fraud hotline discussion. I'm not sure who put that on there.
I did, and actually in part because Kello had done a story, and Councilor Stegers was talking about the fraud hotline. In the storyline, it did talk about there being a fraud hotline available to all city citizens, and actually it really is more for city employees. And so I invited Rich Oaksel, if for any of you who had any questions about how that was going to work, because the story was out there and it was just a little bit, we could fine-tune it. So Rich is here to give us an update on that,
Okay.
on that project. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich, for being with us.
Yes, I think the intention of the audit committee was that it would be for employees, at least at this time. Of course, if the council wants it to be for the citizens, that's their decision, of course. But when we went out for the RFPs, we asked for a hotline for employees, and I think they based the pricing upon that. They asked the number of employees we had, and I think their price was based upon that. If we have two audit committee members here, if I'm speaking out of line, please correct me.
Councilor Kavanaugh?
It was always my recollection that the fraud hotline was to be an internal mechanism that the city would use, the audit committee would use to accept input from employees.
Okay, Councilor Stegers?
Yeah, on the Kelloland report, I think I did mention, when they were talking about fraud, I did mention this is primarily for employees, or if there was somebody that had a contract with the city that felt there was some fraud. Now, what if we do have a situation where somebody has a contract with the city and they they find out there's some fraud? They
For
couldn't use it.
for example, a vendor or,
Yes,
or an
yes.
employee of a vendor?
Sure.
They can always contact internal audit and leave a voicemail, send a letter anonymously. We're on this siouxfalls.org. They can find us pretty easily. So there's some other avenues there. Now, some cities do choose to make that hotline available to vendors. It's a little more complicated because we have thousands of vendors potentially. Sometimes they'll just put it on every check that they send on every accounts payable check. They'll put something in the stub about there's a fraud, waste, abuse hotline with a number. It becomes more complicated when you do that, but some cities choose to do that. But there are other avenues to report fraud besides that hotline. They can always.
I guess I'm a little surprised. I didn't realize that this is based on the number of employees that we have.
Yeah,
Can you say something
when we
about
did the
that?
RFP, we had to. Every company asked, "Well, how many employees do you have?" Because they have some formula for figuring out the volume of calls that they would anticipate. A city of, say, Minneapolis with many more times the employees is going to get charged more than Sioux Falls.
Yeah. Now, since this is based on the number of employees we have, I guess I really don't anticipate many phone calls. But
No.
how many, do they give you a formula of how many we can expect then?
Yeah, they give you a guess based on their experience. Usually the figure is 1% to 2% of employees in any given year will ever call. We have about 1,100 permanent employees, so you can figure upon that. They said at the beginning of, when you first institute it, there's some pent-up demand, so to speak, and you're going to get some more calls than you would, that first couple of months, and then it sort of, it trickles away. So it just varies. But, and you'll get inappropriate calls also. People will call about things that shouldn't be reported, like the women's bathroom isn't clean, so they'll call the fraud hotline about that. I've talked to other auditors in town, and that's been their experience sometimes, that they'll call for that. That's not really what it's for. It's for fraud or illegal acts, that sort of thing. I'm hoping that we don't have tons of calls. I don't think we will. It's more of a control mechanism, sort of a fail-safe mechanism, that if we are not catching things through internal controls or audits, that we have that additional mechanism.
Councilor Costello?
Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, but most of our information that we're going to be getting and putting together for the employees is really geared towards the employees themselves.
Yes.
Now, hypothetically, maybe you probably won't be able to answer this, but maybe you could look into it just to advise us what turns out of it. If a citizen were to call that number, somehow
Yeah.
come by the number,
Yeah.
they're not going to hang up on them.
No, they're not going to hang up.
They're
And
gonna
and
take the
if you're giving the number out to 1,100 employees, I mean, spouses can see, maybe they get a wallet card, a lot of people can see that. And the operator at the provider, they're not going to hang up on them and say, oh, you can't call this number. But, yeah, that's the intent of it, so.
Okay. Rich, thank you. And would you just, for the listening public, for anyone who might be concerned about any fraud problems with vendors or whatever, would you just please remind the listening audience what your office phone number is, please?
Sure. They can call internal audit at 367-8865. We'll be happy to, if they want to leave a voicemail or talk to me personally or just drop a letter to us, postcard, whatever.
Thank you. And Rich, would you remind me, and maybe everyone else knows, is that, again, I believe the fraud hotline for city employees is going to be up and running in about a month. Am I right on that, or am I way off?
That's pretty close. Don't hold me to that, but early 2008. We're just getting the paperwork signed.
All right.
And then as soon as that's signed, then I'll be talking to the provider, and we'll get that set up. So then we'll.
Thank you for your work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Would there be any other open discussion items that you would like to discuss at this time? Okay. I would like a motion to go into an executive session for our just annual review of the city clerk, which we do every year. It's just a very routine matter, and so I would like a motion to go into executive order, please.
So moved, Litson.
Okay, Councilor Litz made the motion, and
Second, James.
Councilor Costello, are you seconding that motion?